We come to the end of another year, but before we move forward into 2024, we first must look back at the year that was. Welcome to Red Hot Go Roundup, a compilation of follow-ups to all the shows I reviewed during the year. Did I finish them? What did I think? This video won't contain any spoilers for the shows I discuss beyond their first 3 episodes, although I might make some vague allusions that only people who have watched the show will understand. Well, okay, there will be one minor spoiler for Bucket List of the Dead, but I'll give you plenty of notice for that one. Also, if you're only interested in certain shows, I've put timecodes in the description. Before we begin with the first Red Hot Go of 2023 though, some of you may recall that 2022 didn't have a roundup due to the lack of reviews that year. So let's turn back the clock a little further and catch up on all the shows that haven't been rounded up yet. My Dress Up Darling. Did you know that I used to be a modern Doctor Who fan? I fell off a little when Capaldi took up the saddle, but I decided to jump back on when his first season on DVD was on sale. I knew I had seen his first episode in cinemas, but hadn't watched any more, so I figured I was in for something fun. Episode 2 started and I realised that I actually had seen it before. Huh, I thought to myself. I guess I must have watched the second episode when it came out. Then the third episode started and the same thing happened again. I had seen it before as well, but forgot about it. This happened over and over until I was forced to accept that I had, in fact, watched the entire season as it came out and just completely forgot about it. I bring this up because I got a similar vibe from rewatching My Dress Up Darling for the purpose of this roundup. I knew that I had at least watched some of it, as I specifically remembered that one scene on the train in episode 5. I won't give away what happens, but if you know, you know. But I could not remember anything else about the rest of the season. So I rewatched My Dress Up Darling and went through very similar motions to when I rewatched Capaldi's first season of Doctor Who. A lot of, oh yeah, that did happen, didn't it? All the way up to the finale. This has basically been a big roundabout way of saying that My Dress Up Darling is a rather forgettable watch. One thing I wish I could have left out of my memory is just how much hornier this show gets. I can respect that Kitagawa is apathetic to a lot of it and even teases Goro at times, but it is possible to have that kind of character without perving on them for the sake of the audience. Also, the scene where Goro first meets Sajuna is extremely disturbing. Whose idea was that? Why did the show need to use its most important storytelling technique to emphasize the point? Does anyone watch this scene and get anything out of it? The show wasn't a total letdown though. I do quite like the energy that Kitagawa brings to the table and how this energy plays off of Goro's more reserved personality. However, I believe the show loses its focus as it continues. It does make token efforts to progress Goro's characterization and make him more comfortable with his passions, but these moments are few and far between. Also, the process for creating the costumes gets completely sidelined. The first cosplay had an entire arc dedicated to it. The second didn't go into as much detail, but made up for it in other areas, particularly regarding the characterization of Sajuna's sister. But then the third costume just appears and never gets worn. Not that I'm complaining, look at this monstrosity. And the fourth appears just as quickly. I would have preferred to see fewer costumes but more focus and character development for each one, you know? So that's where I stand on My Dress Up Darling. On one hand, Kitagawa and her dynamic with Goro is fun. On the other hand, this show is far too horny for its own good. And on the third, much larger hand, the overall experience is just a little forgettable. As I write this, immediately following my second viewing, I feel as though it is only a matter of time before I forget about it all over again. I downgrade its rating to chilly. Dragon Ball. Speaking of shows that are too horny, I criticised Dragon Ball for being just that, as well as mind-numbingly boring in most other areas. I said that I wasn't going to continue watching it, and I have had zero temptation to go back on my word. A few people in the comments actually agreed with my assessment, but insisted that other iterations of Dragon Ball, like Z or Super, were better. And sure, I could believe that a new iteration of a show would improve on its predecessor. and I may even be tempted to give one of those iterations a red hot go someday. But I was also made aware of an argument that comes up a lot when an anime fails the 3-episode test. That the original Dragon Ball gets better as it goes on. Here's the thing about that sentiment. Most media gets better as it goes. As you learn more about the characters and the stakes naturally go up, you are bound to become more engaged with the story. The question is whether it's worth the time investment to become engaged in the first place. And that's what Red Hot Go is ultimately asking. How engaged am I with the story after 3 episodes? If I've spent about an hour with an anime and the answer is not at all, then I'm not going to give it more of my already limited time. If Dragon Ball, Bunny Girl Senpai, Railgun, or We Never Learn can't prove to me within 3 episodes that it's worth watching, then it's blown its chance. I'm not going to stick around on the rare chance that the first 3 episodes are just a cosmic fluke. You may notice that I've gone way off topic for Dragon Ball, but that's what happens when I drop a show right after the Red Hot Go. Would not recommend, will not be returning. Dragon Ball retains its rating of ice cold. Angel Beats. Well, shoot. I decided to continue watching Angel Beats on the off chance it would produce more dreadful writing on par with We Can Make Bullets Out of Dirt, but instead wound up coming to understand why some people rate this show so highly. I've learnt between that Red Hot Go video and now that Angel Beats is something of an anime darling, most lauded for its excellent ending. There's just one problem. Angel Beats does not have an excellent ending. Sure, the final few episodes are leaps and bounds above the quality of the earlier show, but in the same way that a stale salt sandwich is leaps and bounds over having your eyes gouged out. For starters, the entire show contains the poor writing and dreadful contrivance issue I highlighted in my initial video. Sure, it never gets as absurd as Magic Engineers again, but so much of the show is pushed forward through lazily thought out coincidence. Later episodes are also padded out with a plethora of quote-unquote running jokes that never stick around for more than a few episodes, and aren't at all funny. That's not to say the show is never funny. I must admit I did grin at the show's occasional attempts at slapstick. Without giving anything away, the rocket chair was particularly amusing. But the poor contrived writing is not what annoyed me about Angel Beats. Oh no, I knew I had signed up for that eye gouging when I decided to keep watching. No, the annoyance began around episode 8. When there was a significant shift in the narrative, a plan is formed to solve the running conflict that, for spoiler reasons, I will say is giving every human student in the school their favourite flavour of ice cream. But at the same time, monsters outside of Angel's control show up, and we learn they are hunting the human students to cut out their tongues so that they can never eat ice cream again. And we learn this when it happens to one of the main clique. This should have been episode 3. We finally have a clear goal and a genuine obstacle to it. I would have much rather been watching this than the token baseball game or whatever other nonsense they got up to before this point. But whatever. The stakes are set and I'm ready to get properly invested. They even choose one of the main clique to test this on. We get to learn their backstory, the protagonist has to figure out their favourite flavour, and the episode ends with them getting to eat it. That moment in the narrative was the most optimistic I had ever been about Angel Beats. And the show straight up squanders it. What could have been an amazing structure for the rest of the season gets hand-waved away twice. First in a scene where every human character outside of the main clique says, "Oh, we already figured out our favourite flavours off screen, we just came to let you know before we started eating." Now, that I could forgive. The main clique is full enough, so surely the side characters had to be figured out quickly so that we can get to the preferences of the characters we've actually gotten to know. But nope. There's a big battle where everyone comes together, the main characters have to go underground for the boss gauntlet, and when they come back up, someone says, "Oh, by the way, your friends found their favourite flavours while you were down there, so no need to worry about them anymore." I admit that the final scene is very melancholy, but I didn't care anymore. This show had the opportunity to be something amazing and squandered it. Every half-decent idea was thrown away in service of something tropey, inferior, and most damningly of all, completely superfluous. Here's what this premise could have been. You've got a crew of a dozen or so cardboard cutout characters who need a bowl of their favourite ice cream. So every episode focuses on one of them. Flesh them out, let us watch them enjoy that cold treat, and then move on to the next. You can keep the rivalry between Angel and the group, but lose the NPCs, lose the magic engineers, lose the 3 rock concerts, 2 dumb as hell heists, and baseball game, and instead spend that time actually doing something with your plot. I continued watching Angel Beats for some dumb fun, but I instead watched someone take a boring piece of art and tear it to shreds to make sloppy paper mache. If you want a story about an afterlife that explores its characters properly, is genuinely funny, and pulls off the melancholy ending to perfection, The Good Place is far more worth your time than this mediocre mess. I downgrade the rating of Angel Beats to ice cold. But I'm not done talking about it. A train wreck this devastating needs to be thoroughly investigated. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Nier Automata 1.1a. As someone who left the original Nier Automata video game a little confused until I saw analyses from smarter people, I was appreciative of Nier Automata 1.1a continuing to sprinkle in hints as to the colourful history between 2B and 9S. Seriously, how many of you who have played the original game know that they had met long before the events of the story? I certainly didn't until Clamps pointed it out in his analysis series. That may seem like an odd point to start on, but I thought I would treat the fans of this show to the one thing I liked about it before tearing the rest of it apart. Despite how strong it started, the anime is not very good. I didn't notice quite as much over-explaining past the first 3 episodes, but the fact that the android resistance was boring and generic made itself right at home. The machines also lost their interesting traits as the stories involving them were sped through to save time. The adaptation also took some odd turns. I won't spoil anything, but there's a moment where the brothers switch places in a fairly important scene. The rest of their story plays out similarly, but a lot of the consequences of this moment make a whole lot less sense with the switch. Granted, the switch was shocking in the moment, but in the end, the narrative would have been stronger if it had kept to the original. Funny that, it's almost like the game that was so popular it got an adaptation 6 years after release had a story that was pretty good. I wonder if there's some kind of rule that anime adaptations of video games have to be worse than their source materials. Maybe the game always gets a boost in sales from purists like myself who tell people to just buy and play the original. I downgrade the show's rating to chilly. If Season 2 changes the mid-game twist, I am not going to be a happy camper. The Angel Next Door spoils me rotten. I can imagine this segment having one of 2 reactions. People are either going to think that this is the worst take I've put onto the internet since I said that Ready Player One was the gold standard for fan service, or they're going to hear the title, The Angel Next Door Spoils Me Rotten, and think, oh yeah, that was a show from this year, wasn't it? Somehow, The Angel Next Door took every bit of praise I gave in my original video and went back on all of it. Chitose started as someone with a sharp wit and willingness to take the protagonist down a peg or 2, and became just a high-energy girl archetype. The much louder dynamic between Amane and Mahiru started as a cozy little friendship with charm and wholesome factor, but as the story dragged on it became static and stagnant. And worst of all, they took Mahiru, one of the few female leads in romance that didn't spend half their screen time flustered, and made her just that. In every other scene, she's as red as the tomato she's inexplicably holding in the OP. The confident bravado that had drawn me to her in the first place is just gone. She even calls Amane Baka a few times just in case she wasn't generic enough for you. What about the twist at the end of episode 3 that I hoped would shake up the status quo? Well, it did in technicality, but in spirit the show stayed more or less the same following that moment. Episode 4 was boring, Episode 5 was boring, Episode 6 was boring. But then Episode 7 came along, and we got more context behind Mahiru's old life. I was interested in this around Episode 3, but after what should have been a character-defining scene, I felt nothing. This show has thoroughly numbed my brain to the point that a scene where our female protagonist opens up in a truly real way and gets comforted by our male lead who shows incredible empathy gets less reaction out of me than the scene where said female lead gets a birthday present. Yeah, that's when I knew it was time to put the show down. I spoke before about how forgettable my dress-up darling is, but even that show had a few scenes I remembered after a year. The scene on the train, the scene where Kitagawa saw her first cosplay for the first time, or the moment when she sees Goro's Hina doll in the sewing room. Even shows I absolutely despise have their memorable moments. Angel Beats has the whole magical engineer thing that will live rent-free in my head forever. I still remember the main character from Railgun emptying her school swimming pool with her power. That was pretty neat. Even Bunny Girl Senpai, my go-to example of a dull, monotonous slog, had the first scene with the female lead in the bunny outfit that was so bizarre and out of left field that it sticks in your brain like gum to the bottom of your shoe. Angel Next Door doesn't have that. There's no way of knowing for sure, but I doubt I will remember anything from this show in a year's time. In fact, let's do a little test. As I write these words, it is 4:33 AM on Monday the 27th of March 2023. As I record this, it will be around late December. When I get to this point in the script, I will stop reading it and tell you, off the top of my head, everything I can remember about the Angel Next Door after the first 3 episodes. Hey guys, Live Action Joe here. Now, what can I remember about the Angel Next Door spoils me rotten beyond the first 3 episodes? I remember Amane's dad showed up at some point. I can't remember what he said. I just remember that he was there. I remember the scene where Mahiru's mother told her off. That was in episode 7. That was the scene that should have been really good, but my brain was jelly by then, so I couldn't appreciate it. And that's it. That's all I remember about the show. While Angel Next Door had some promise at the beginning, it ultimately couldn't keep up my interest. I'm downgrading its rating to chilly, and I'll likely never think about it again. Kubo-san doesn't let it be. Kubo-san was yet another disappointment, but not one that surprised me. Despite keeping my mind open to the idea that the showrunners could expand upon the source material, I knew that if they failed to do that, I was going to fall right off this one. What did surprise me was the response. I happen to know that my fanbase quite like this show, so I was expecting at least a little bit of pushback for lambasting it. But to my surprise, the reception was positive. There were a few people who agreed with me on this show, or could at least understand my reason for putting it down despite liking it themselves. So for this segment of the roundup, I thought I would read through and respond to some of the comments to further expand on the show, and just as a bit of fun. If you're not interested in that, or just checked this segment to see if I had come to my senses, there are timecodes in the description, feel free to skip ahead. Just commenting points out something that I missed. That Shiraishi's lack of agency doesn't just make him a bland protagonist, it makes his dynamic with Kubo bland as well. You get a sense that Shiraishi would react this way with anyone who showed him this kind of attention, and that his attitude towards Kubo is less about how he feels about her, and more about the fact that she's likely the first girl he's ever been friends with. I love comments like these, even if they make me feel a little silly for missing points here and there. Tama points out that my bringing up all the other romance anime I've watched is an indication that my tastes have changed. Something they admit happens to everyone, but something I should be aware of. They use Takagi-san as an example. Would I like it if it came out today? I'm not sure if I would have enjoyed it to the same extent. But despite being another light-hearted slice of life, it still runs laps around Kubo-san. As I explore more stories, I will inevitably evolve my understanding of storytelling, and be better equipped to tell when a story is told poorly. Yeah, I guess it's a shame that some shows I would have liked a few years ago will no longer be my thing, but it also means that I can appreciate the few gold nuggets I find even more. Tama, if you ever decide to pick up the microphone and start making analysis videos of your own, I would love to hear you deconstruct why Kubo-san gave you those warm fuzzy Takagi-san feels. But it just didn't do that for me. And finally, my wonderful patron, the Blue Crystal 770, points out that scenes of Kubo messing with Shiraishi are further evidence of an unsettling trend that is most prominent in shows like Nagatoro, but even crop up in more conventionally popular shows like Toradora, relationships that involve bullying as part of their dynamic. Crystal, I could write an entire video on the bad relationship precedents set by anime. From courting to intimacy to how one simply treats members of the opposite sex. And if I ever do make that video, this will be another vector of study to consider. You're right, it is unsettling how often it happens, even in shows that I love. Kubo-san retains its rating of ice cold and will likely replace Bunny Girl Senpai as my go-to example of a tedious show. Next. Tomo-chan is a girl. Confession time, I very nearly dropped this show. Episodes 4, 5 and 6 were just a bit dull and uneventful, and I found myself slipping out of the story. Luckily, things picked back up in episode 7, and I'm glad that they did because Tomo-chan is a Girl is a delightful show that I'm glad I got to finish. I'm not going to spoil any major details, but I will have to generally discuss what happens in vague terms to get my point across. Just skip to the next show if you don't want to hear about it. For starters, while the overbearing exposition did indeed disappear after episode 1, there were some contrived situations later in the show. The humour remains strong, plenty of slapstick and humorous observational comedy throughout, and some of it even made me laugh out loud, which is always nice. What's also nice is that this is a one-and-done adaptation. Every big moment I remember from the manga is here and accounted for. There will probably never be a season 2, but that means what we do have has a satisfying ending. And Lord knows those can be difficult to come by these days. There's a moment from the manga I remember where a fairly passive character becomes angry, and I remember this moment having more impact in the manga than it does in the anime. But besides that, the big moments are all handled brilliantly. The moment where Misuzu helps someone in a not-so-kind way had all the impact I could have hoped for. The resolution to the main conflict, while dragged out a little, is a satisfying one that even takes time to discuss what it will mean for our characters moving forward. The manga had a fight scene at the very end that always perplexed me, but the anime makes clear what this fight is about and why it makes sense for the characters participating in it. Despite small doses of contrivance and vapid fan service, Tomo-chan is a Girl is a damn fine watch with a persistent sense of humour, characters with depth, and a strong resolution for the overarching conflict. Tomo-chan is a Girl retains its rating of boiling. The Dangers of My Heart. I gotta say, there were a few Red Hot Go videos this year that made me wary of potential backlash, but I did not see the response to the Dangers of My Heart review coming. What's going on? I asked myself as I was beset by comments telling me I just didn't get it. This has got to be one of the worst first impressions a show has ever left me with. How does it have more defenders than Kubo-san or Angel Next Door? Well, now that I've finished the show, I can start to see why my Red Hot Go got such a negative reception. Episode 4 flips a switch. Almost all of my complaints either disappeared altogether or were subverted. An episode 4 or 5 story starts with Kotoru lurking again, but he gets caught this time, and the lurking ends more or less for good. There are no more edgy rants. His fascination with dark subject matter doesn't even come up again until near the end of the show. Anna actually acknowledges what Kotoru does for her in a way that moves her characterization forward, and we actually get scenes of Anna and Kotoru together, meaning their bond can form properly. Where the hell was this in the first 3 episodes? I get that some of it was set up. The scene where Kotoru actively stands up to the harasser is so much more satisfying after seeing him try to do so indirectly. And the scene where Kotoru is able to open up to the pervy classmate wouldn't have been as impactful without seeing the divide in the first place. But why did the first 3 episodes need to waste so much time on stories that amounted to nothing? While the rest of the show is still very contrived at times, it certainly does pick up with some excellent character moments and a brilliant dynamic organically forming between our two leads. I'm going to bump up the rating to lukewarm, but understand that it gets good after episode 4 is not an acceptable defense for a show. Tonikawa Over the Moon for You Season 2. Tonikawa Over the Moon for You Season 2 was interesting. This season seemed a lot more invested in having Nasa and Tsukasa navigate more intimate relationship milestones. And those stories were fine for the most part. I like the maturity that both of them can approach these situations with, communicating their discomfort where necessary and clearly establishing boundaries. I am a little off-put with how often Nasa will violate these boundaries and even seems to get a slight kick out of doing so. I believe I mentioned in my Red Hot Go for Season 1 that just because you're married to someone doesn't mean you can do things without their consent. The show also spent a lot of time on stories that just kind of spun its wheels. Yeah, I get that it's a show about hanging out with this cast of characters, but it still sometimes got dull enough that I was waiting for certain scenes to end. That was admittedly rare though. For the most part, the show maintained its level of just fine. But then, just as often as the stories I didn't care for, there would be an unexpected gem. Tonikawa Season 2 began to delve into Tsukasa's backstory. Why she was able to save Nasa from the truck accident, why she disappeared for 2 years afterwards, and what her connection is with that weird moon rock from Season 1. Let me be clear, it doesn't outright answer any of these mysteries. If anything, I just have more questions. The one thing it does outright answer though is why she decided to marry Nasa, after only having known him for a few minutes. I can't believe I have to say this out loud, but here goes. The premise of this show is inherently silly and unrealistic. While the explanation Tsukasa gives seems grounded and like a reason a real person might have a shotgun wedding, it only serves to make the central plot more ridiculous. There really is no sensible explanation for the swiftness of the marriage between these two characters, and the more the show tries to justify that premise, the more unreal it is going to seem. The fact that I'm still here, most of the way through Season 2, should tell you that I've bought into your narrative. You don't need to try and convince me after the fact that it actually makes total sense. It doesn't. So on one hand, the show is sometimes a little boring and sometimes a little unsettling. On the other hand, the mysteries behind Tsukasa are starting to unravel and I'm rather excited to see where they go. But ultimately, the first 3 episodes reflect the overall quality of the show perfectly. Tonikawa Over the Moon for You is fine. It retains its rating of lukewarm. Bucket List of the Dead. Bucket List of the Dead was a surprise from the word go. A zombie story that critiques modern life is nothing new, but the critique is usually on individuals. BLD seemed more interested in critiquing the systems and power structures that fail those individuals. To a point, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The hinted character arcs for Shizuka and Akira don't just get underway almost immediately, but they also get expanded upon. We learn why Shizuka is so rigid and logic-driven. We learn that despite having a new lease on life, Akira isn't completely free of the mindset his old workplace imposed on him. Kenichiro and the 4th main character Beatrix don't have as much going on in terms of character development. But I think focusing on Akira and Shizuka was the right call. The contrivance issue continued. There was nothing as bad as angel beats, but there were still too many convenient run-ins between certain characters. The humour around Kenichiro's nudity wasn't as painful as I thought it would be. It was either not played for laughs or played for laughs so poorly that it didn't even register as humour. But despite those small annoyances, I genuinely enjoyed the show. The arcs were well thought out, the character banter was fun, and the cold opens that portrayed bucket list items being ticked off were entertaining. And that final arc, oh boy was that final arc not very good. Don't get me wrong, I like the setting. I like the reason Akira is there and the people he interacts with. My issue with the final arc is the villain. This is the one and only thing in this video that I am going to explicitly spoil. but it isn't exactly a twist in the story, and your enjoyment should not be affected by knowing what to expect going in. Having said that, if you do want to watch Bucket List of the Dead completely blind, feel free to skip ahead to the next section. The thing I loved about Bucket List of the Dead is that it didn't criticize everyday people for the state of modern society. It had its sights aimed at the power structures, the hierarchies that incentivize exploitation, and the grind-set attitudes encouraged by those who directly profit from slowly killing their workforce. So imagine my disappointment when the final arc says, "Oh, but you know, there are some people who deserve to have a terrible life." Let me just say from the top that no, I do not intend to defend any of these individuals. Each is a pathetic, sad sack in their own way, and their actions and attitudes are inexcusable. But my issue is that the show, for seemingly the first time, seems hell-bent on targeting individuals who don't fit into the society it was seemingly criticizing earlier in the season. Let's not explore the culture that fostered some of these character defects. Let's not delve into how these misogynistic tendencies were able to manifest in the first place. Let's not question why someone might feel isolated from a society that seemingly has space for them. They're just bad people. End of story. Do you guys remember Robots, the 2005 Blue Sky Studios film about class disparity and medical care? I've heard in more recent years that Robots is an anti-capitalism film, because the villain is a CEO of a monopolistic corporation that deliberately limits healthcare access for the working class. But here's the thing, the film ends with that monopolistic corporation still intact, just run by someone more altruistic. That's not anti-capitalism, that's anti-bad guy. A true anti-capitalist film would have ended with the company being split up into smaller competing manufacturers, or seen some kind of regulation put in place to ensure that spare parts would always be available for those who needed them. But it doesn't. According to the film, the issue isn't that these characters live in a society where the right to live has a price tag on it. The problem is that a single greedy character has made that price tag too much. Does Bucket List of the Dead have a similar message? I excused the hyperbolic portrayals of toxic work culture in my original video, but should I have? Why does a show that was seemingly a critique on societal issues caused by those on top, end with an arc where the villains are just a bunch of powerless nobodies who want to sow chaos for chaos's sake? Is this show a warning to those atop the power structures that those power structures are failing? Or is it, like Robots, a tale of a society that is totally fine bar a few bad apples? I still very much enjoyed Bucket List of the Dead. I'm not ready to write it off yet, but should there be a second season, I'll be interested to see which direction it goes in. It keeps its rating of boiling, and I hope that there is more to come. That's it for the recaps, but as always, we need to end this recap with a ranking. Number 10, my least favourite, a tedious slog with no redeeming value, Dragon Ball. Number 9, just barely beating Dragon Ball with some interesting character quirks, Kubo-san doesn't let it be. For sliding off my brain so thoroughly despite the half-decent introduction, number 8 goes to The Angel Next Door spoils me rotten. Basically tied with Angel, this show gains points for being slightly less forgettable, but loses them for the disturbing fan service. Number 7 is My Dress Up Darling. Torn between a brilliant setup, a dreadful payoff, and some entertainingly baffling writing, number 6 is Angel Beats. For having the worst first impression when compared to the rest of the show's overall quality, I award the number 5 spot to The Dangers of My Heart. The number 4 spot goes to the adaptation that is only faithful when it feels like it, Nier Automata version 1.1a. For being just fine and inoffensive for the most part, I give number 3 to Tonikawa Over the Moon for You Season 2. The final two were genuinely quite difficult. Do I prefer a show that sticks to a proven formula but pulls it off well? Or do I prefer a show that takes some exciting risks, even if it doesn't stick the landing? Do I prefer a show that is completely inoffensive, or do I prefer to be nodding my head one second and shaking my fist the next? It took a while to come to a conclusion, but I ultimately decided, by process of elimination, to give the number 2 spot to Tomo-chan Is a Girl. Meaning of course that my number 1 show of 2023, even though it has its issues, is Bucket List of the Dead. That's it for Red Hot Go Roundup 2023. Thank you for sticking with me this year. I can't wait to see you in 2024. I'd like to thank my patrons: Orion Tran, Data52, Jamman5, Pixcalibur, Tyler Bennett, Tamka, Jeremy Bashik, Fireclaw, Christopher Wang, Luke Stewart, Swiss Cage, Gerald, John Lowe, Dustin Rubin, The Blue Crystal 770, and Garen. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.